So I think we will start now. So hello and welcome everybody to our event today. We are very glad that you all showed interest in this webinar. Today we will discuss the current developments along the Balkanroute and also in the European asylum system with a special focus on the situation in Serbia. The whole event will be recorded. Excuse me. The whole event will be recorded and available on YouTube afterwards. And yes, this whole webinar is hosted and organized by the Balkanroute. We are a network of German activists focusing on the situation of people on the move along the Balkanroute. And trying to raise awareness in the European and German context, especially for the situation. And now I'm especially happy to welcome our two panelists, which will be introduced by Magda now. Thank you.
Yes, we would like to welcome Milica Swapčić. She's a lawyer and activist from Serbia, and with her NGO Click Active, she is doing individual case assistance, advocates for the rights of people in the move, and draws attention to systematic problems on the Serbian and European asylum system. As well, we would like to welcome Wiebke Judith. She's a legal policy speaker of the German NGO Pro Asyl, and Pro Asyl is fighting since a long time for the rights of refugees and migrants in Germany and Europe. And together with Pro Asyl, Wiebke was publishing recently reviews and analysis of the Commission's proposal of the new Pact of Migration.
Thank you. So now we will start. We would like to start with Wiebke, and we would like to ask you about the current developments in the European asylum system with a special regard to the new proposal of the Commission for a new pact on migration. And yes, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much for this invitation. I'm gonna start sharing my screen to show you a little presentation I prepared. So of course, when we talk about the new pact, there's actually a lot to unpack, literally. So I'm gonna focus on a very specific aspect, which is basically what is planned for everything that happens at the border, because I felt that this was especially important for a country like Serbia, what is actually gonna happen in the EU countries that are bordering it, and perhaps also the influence will be the biggest concerning these aspects. Again, somehow with the screen sharing, there's always a little problem. So I'm just gonna do it again to hope that then it works, that I can click on my PowerPoint. No, why? I'll just do it one more time. I'm sorry. We actually did test it before, but as always, I'm just going to start without it being in the, without it being already in the mode. And I hope that this way. Now it works, yes. So when we talk about the new pact, of course, I want to give a bit of background information. So it is actually about a reform of the so-called Common European Asylum System. Probably many of you kind of know what it is. It basically compromises, for example, the Dublin regulation, the qualifications directive, the asylum procedures directive. So it's all of the secondary law the EU has created on the asylum system. And most of these regulations and directives are actually from 2013. But then, of course, in 2015, we had what was termed the refugee crisis, but which was rather a solidarity crisis in Europe. And of course, we all saw that clearly there is no common European asylum system in practice. Surely our analysis and that of certain member states were a bit different to what is really wrong with the system. But nevertheless, it was kind of clear there has to be a reform. So in 2016, the Commission did a proposal for a reform of the Common European Asylum System. But these negotiations basically stalled at some point, primarily also because member states could not come to an agreement, especially with regard to the question, how are asylum seekers distributed? Who is responsible for them? Is it the member states at the border? Is it everyone? So these were kind of the most important questions back then. When Ursula von der Leyen became the president of the Commission last year, she made pretty clear that she wanted to continue to push for this reform process. But then throughout the year, actually, deadlines that were set kept being pushed and pushed. But then the fire of Moria happened, and suddenly the Commission saw again what they called momentum to push forward the debate on this. Unfortunately, as I will point out, they don't really apparently see the momentum to really change the law in a way to prevent from places like Moria to happen ever again on European ground. But so on the 23rd of September this year, they proposed the new pact on migration and asylum. So what is this new pact actually? Actually, what is the new pact is basically more the political statement, but it comes with a number of legislative proposals. So they proposed the screening regulation. This is one of the things I will talk about. This is new. We don't have that right now in the law. Then they proposed some changes to the proposals from 2016 on the asylum procedures regulation. Also, I will talk about that. Then they scrapped the Dublin 4 proposal, but don't be fooled, so to speak. It's still, Dublin is still in there. It's just included now in the regulation on asylum and migration management, which also concerns kind of, somewhat new solidarity mechanisms, but I will not really get into that. That's a whole other field, but perhaps it'll come up later in the debate, or we can also talk about it. They also made a proposal for regulation addressing situation of crisis and force majeure, and some changes to the Eurodac regulation. But as I said, I will focus on the screening and the asylum procedures regulation. So one of the things that they are proposing is a screening, which is meant to concern everyone who enters the EU who does not fulfill the entry requirements. So this can be both people who seek asylum, but also people who don't. This can be at land, air, or sea borders. So of course, in the case of Serbia, it would be primarily then the land border to a EU country. And also it would concern people who ask for asylum in a transit zone like Hungary used to have till this year. So the screening is supposed to be conducted at or in proximity of an external border. And it's supposed to be conducted without delay, but under normal circumstances with a maximum of 5 days. And in the case of disproportionate numbers of third-party nationals who arrive in 10 days. During this time, the person is not considered to have entered the EU or that member state. This is what we lawyers like to call the fiction of non-entry. And it's a bit of a weird thing, indeed, because the person is on the territory, but it's still considered legally to not have entered. It is a bit comparable to when we fly and we arrive at an airport, but we actually do only a stopover. We never really enter that country, but we stay in the transit. And then we continue on. And so this is a bit also where the transit zone, the term comes from, of course, that it's considered that the person is not actually in the country yet, legally speaking. But perhaps to just make that clear, they are on the territory. So the European Convention of Human Rights applies, the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights applies. Actually, all EU law applies to the people. But what we think that the main result of this will be that there will be a considerable restriction on the freedom of movement or liberty. So most likely we'll just see detention, because this is also in border procedures that have this fiction of non-entry right now, people are usually detained. So the first thing everyone will experience when they come to the EU is for sure detention, according to this regulation. The purpose of the screening is to register the people, to do identification processes, to do a security check, to do health and vulnerability assessment. And all of this we already have. Those are not as such new obligations. These are all things the member states have to do already now. So really the new thing is actually this fiction of non-entry during the screening procedure. In the end, what we can actually say is that the main purpose is to use the screening to channel the people then into different procedures. So it's a bit of like a selection mechanism to decide who, if they seek asylum, who gets a normal asylum procedure and who will get an asylum border procedure. And one important thing to mention here is that there's no remedy against this decision. So you can't actually fight, for example, that you are allocated to the asylum border procedure. This is not foreseen in the law. And perhaps one thing I'll mention additionally, which is also regulated in the screening regulation, is a new monitoring mechanism. It is meant to prevent human rights abuses, but actually not even primarily during the screening, but what it is intended, at least on the paper, that it would prevent pushbacks. But I think perhaps we'll get a bit into that also later if it would really be working in that way. Because of course the screening actually takes place once the person has arrived, and the pushback often happens kind of even before that, at least between Greece and Turkey. That would be the situation, but also how effective such a monetary mechanism would be. At the moment, the regulation says it has to be independent, but also it would be set up by the member state. So then it really depends also a bit what kind of member states puts up such a mechanism. So one of the channels that may follow after the screening is the asylum border procedure. Now, we already have the possibility of border procedures right now in the current acquis, but with the new proposals, it would become actually mandatory for the member states to apply border procedures in some cases. That is for country of origins with a Europe-wide protection rate of 20% or lower. Then for people who allegedly present false information or withholding documents, or for people who are considered a threat to national security or public order. And the problem also with these latter 2 points is that this is really hugely up to interpretation by the member states. And also with the first point, of course, that also people who come from low recognition rate countries, they can have very complex cases. So also they need good and fair asylum procedures, of course. The asylum border procedure is meant to not last longer than 12 weeks, so roughly 3 months. This includes actually the legal remedies. And right now we have 1 month of asylum border procedure. So this is actually a tripling of the border procedure. So this is quite serious. Also during this time, and this is why I explained it so lengthy before, the fiction of non-entry applies. So already now we have 5 days plus 12 weeks that the person is on the territory, but not considered to have entered. And the main problem, of course, when you are considered to not have entered, probably or most likely detained during the during the asylum procedure. For us, it's really also the question, what does this mean for the people who are going through this really important procedure? Will they have access to lawyers? Will they have access to NGOs? Can they enter? Like, can NGOs, for example, enter such camps? How are the conditions in general? And when we look into what happened in Greece, for example, with Moria, this is no way that fair asylum procedures can take place under these conditions. So we are really worried, or we don't think that actually fair procedures would take place under these kind of conditions. There are exceptions to who has to undergo asylum border procedures. This is unaccompanied minors, minors below the age of 12 and their families, which is a bit of a weird age limit, which we don't know at all in current law. And then there are provisions that people who have special procedural needs or medical reasons, that they should also be exempted from the procedure. Also, one thing to mention is that there are the mandatory application cases, but the member states are always free to actually apply it to even more. So if a member state wishes, they can make it almost a standard procedure. In the asylum border procedure, decisions can be taken on the admissibility. So this actually means that you don't look into what happened to the person in their country of origin. This is on the merits level. But during the admission phase, you can ask, for example, if a person has come through a safe third country. And this is, for example, where Serbia can come into play. Hungary used to treat Serbia as I think it was kind of like safe transit country, which this year was found to not conform actually to the current EU law. And one of the aspects was that Hungary said, oh, it's enough if you just transited through Serbia for there to be like a connection to the country. And currently you need like a stronger connection to the country for it to be considered a safe third country. But in the proposals from 2016, the Commission, and these proposals are still valid if they have not changed. The Commission actually foresees to lower the criteria for safe third country. And one of the aspects that they want to lower is actually this question of transit, so that transit is enough for a country to be considered a safe third country. So this might be actually one of these things which might really make also a difference to Serbia. But if the member states want to do admissibility or merits, that depends a bit on the member states. So if you are rejected in the asylum border procedure, first of all, you only have restricted legal remedies. It's supposed to be restricted to one instance, and also for there to be no automatic suspensive effect, which basically means that you can be returned without that there has been a court decision, which is of course hugely problematic. But in case you are rejected, you will be challenged into the return border procedure. And this is a procedure we don't have in the current law yet. And this is also meant to last for up to 12 weeks. Actually, in both border procedures during the crisis regulation, if that applies, you can expand it also to 20 weeks. And also during the return border procedure, of course, again, the person is considered to not have entered the member state or the EU. And also really for the return border procedure, it kind of means that you can effectively hinder a person from moving around, to probably detain that person without actually fulfilling the criteria, for example, that you need to fulfill for detention pending removal, which really means that you have to have individual grounds that the person might evade the deportation. So this is a kind of a way to keep a person at the border to try to make the deportation easier. So in the end, what we would have at the border is 5 to 10 days screening, an asylum border procedure of 12 weeks, and a return border procedure of 12 weeks. All in all, basically equaling 6 months of detention at the EU border. So this is really not a prospect that we want. But also to emphasize, these are right now the proposals from the Commission. So this is just the starting point, again, of negotiations with the Council and the European Parliament. So there are still things that can change. Apparently, the border procedures are also a bit of a contentious issue. I'm not sure if it's quite for, again, the same reasons that we see, but there are definitely still discussions on this point also between the member states. So thank you very much. And I'm looking very much forward now to the presentation from Milika.
Thank you, Wiebke. Yes, now we would like to ask you, Milica, to give us a short introduction and an overview of the situation for people on the move in Serbia and at the external borders.
Well, first of all, thanks everybody for watching and for tuning in to this webinar. So for those of you who maybe are not so familiar with the situation here in Serbia, Serbia is one of the countries located at the Western Balkan. We have borders with 3 EU countries through which the Balkanroute goes, with Croatia, Hungary, and Romania. All these 3 routes are currently very active, and this is the exiting points for refugee routes away from Serbia. We are not members of the European Union yet. However, we have started the procedure of joining the European Union. And the question of migration and asylum is one of the most important questions in these procedures. The chapter 24, which involves both illegal migrations and asylum system, the action plan for this chapter has been revised several times over the past few years. We had one revision this year as well. And also the European Union is quite closely monitoring the situation here. We have the feeling that as the time goes by, both the European Union and our domestic authorities are more focused on basically putting people outside of system, not giving them access to asylum and to the asylum procedure, but instead to keep them without the legal residency here, which would eventually lead to deportations. There is a lot of pushbacks. A lot of NGOs and international organizations from around the world reported on the pushbacks from the EU borders, both from Croatia, from Hungary, from Romania also. So Serbia is now basically like a buffer zone between the non-EU countries and the EU, and is definitely contributing to this externalization of the EU borders. We signed the agreement with Frontex of their presence in Serbia. We are now waiting, this agreement has already been signed, and we are now waiting for it to be confirmed in the national parliament, which should happen very soon. After this agreement is approved by the national parliament, the Frontex officers will have access to Serbian territory. According to this agreement, they're coming to Serbia not to protect Serbian territory, but to protect the EU borders and the EU territory. So we expect them to be also on these borders with Croatia, Hungary, and Romania. The agreement is quite controversial. They are excluded from criminal liability here in Serbia. So basically, for any potential criminal acts that they may conduct here, they will not be held responsible by the Serbian criminal courts. Also, they're allowed to carry weapons while they're here, which is also very controversial. But we will see how it will look in practice. We are not members of, we are not part of this common asylum system within the EU, since we are not the members of the European Union. However, it's a plan for Serbia to join the Dublin system and Eurodac system even before we join the European Union, which will be the first such case of any European countries. For now, the plan is that we join the Dublin 2 years before we join the European Union. It's still not clear on the dates when this might happen. However, we started the procedural preparations and actions to join our national database of fingerprints and ID data to join together with the Eurodac system. What is also probably important to say is that within this accession to the EU, Serbia is expected to sign several readmission agreements with the countries of origin. Basically, it was planned for us to sign these agreements by the end of this year. This was probably now postponed because of the COVID situation, and we also had national elections this year, but we definitely expect them to happen next year. So Serbia is planning to sign readmission agreements with Afghanistan, with Pakistan, with Iraq, Morocco, Algeria, so basically all main countries of origin. We also built 2 new detention centers, at one at the border with Bulgaria, one at the border with Romania, and this was done away from the public eye. It's completely unknown from which money was this institutions built, what is the plan, who will be accommodated there, and what will happen in the future. What we definitely know is that there are plans to deport people from Serbia to the countries of origin. This will also definitely affect the new pact on asylum and migrations. Since Serbia is not a member of the European Union, we fall under this. It's very possible that we will be this place where the monitoring and screening will be done before people manage to enter European Union. We already had these transit zones, the Hungarian transit zones in the past. I don't know if how many people know, but these transit camps were actually on the territory of Serbia. So the official border crossing points of the Hungary are on the Serbian territory, and the fence and these transit centers were just built to connect their official border crossing points. So basically the fence and the transit zones themselves are on our territory. If Serbia approved this kind of actions of building the fence, of building the transit zones, and our authorities were very eager to cooperate with the Hungarian authorities in transporting people to these transit centers, to push them inside without any hesitation. It's very likely that they will do the same now with the new pact on asylum and migrations. The problem is that also a lot of people here are now being criminalized. Much more people here are getting the cancellation of stay, which is the first step in deportation procedures. So we expect that a lot of people will not even have the opportunity to start this new EU border asylum procedure. So it will be already established that they're not asylum seekers, and that they should be deported back to their countries of origin instead of continuing the asylum procedure and starting it within these new EU rules. Also, what is relatively new in Serbia. So there is a lot of pushback cases. Until now, Serbia was relatively tolerant towards the refugees who were staying in Serbia. They didn't get any kind of protection within the system. Access to asylum is now almost impossible. But in the cases of pushbacks, people were tolerated to stay in different squats across Serbia, in Belgrade, but also in the border area. They were provided some very basic accommodation within the camp, which was very limited. But Serbia did not do so many pushbacks. We had cases of collective expulsions, but they were not so common. However, this year and in the last few weeks especially, we have more and more cases of pushbacks from the Serbian territory. People are being pushed back both to Macedonia and to Bulgaria. We also hear of cases that people are being pushed back from the camps, so that the Serbian police would come to the Serbian camps, take 10, 15, 20 people from the camp, and then push them back either to Bulgaria or to Macedonia. And this is happening on the whole territory of Serbia. So we had cases that the police was coming to the camps on the north borders in Subotica, close to the Hungary, and to the camps close to the Croatian border and push people back. But they were also doing this in the camps closer to the Bulgarian and Macedonian borders. This also in many cases results with the chained pushbacks. So people are then being pushed back further to Turkey or Greece, and then also back to Turkey. So this is now also apparently one of the system how Serbia will deal with migrations.
So thank you very much both for your very interesting inputs and statements. We would now like to concentrate a bit further also on the situation on the external borders, which we already did, but to raise some main points again. And then I would also like to invite the audience to raise questions. We will collect the questions and contributions, remarks, and try to raise them during the discussion. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat. So now we would like to start again with Wiebke. And yes, you already mentioned the screening procedure and border procedure, and now it would be very interesting to develop a bit further what that means for the rights of the asylum seekers, especially the right of individual assessment. Is there the possibility really to ensure that there will be still an individual assessment of the asylum application, and also the border procedures really remind me of the transit zones in Hungary, and so can it be ensured that the conditions will be not as in these transit zones? And then also, if you said that the standards will be lowered, is there the possibility that Serbia will be like a buffer zone for Europe? Yes, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And also thank you, Milica, for this very interesting insight into Serbia. And I think the point you raised of Serbia being a buffer zone, I think this is really quite the just crucial point, and that doesn't only concern Serbia, but of course also other countries. And in the end, what we see a bit in general is just responsibility being pushed like further and further away. So the kind of more central and northern European states say, oh, we don't want the responsibility, let the border EU member states take care of that. And then they say, oh no, we don't want the responsibility. Either we declare Turkey or Serbia a safe third country, and we try to do it via this route, or we just do pushbacks, which are completely illegal under all international standards. And then, of course, in a way, countries like Serbia are almost incentivized to do the same, because they just follow EU role model basically, and also continue to push back. And then we really see people in need of protection always being pushed further and further back towards countries in crisis, countries in war. So this is a really, really worrying development. And to look again into this question of screening and border procedure. So yeah, there will, I mean, of course, it's a bit now future telling. So it's always a bit difficult, of course. These are proposals. We don't know exactly how things will look like in 4 or 5 years once things are really implemented. But I think we, of course, also have to learn from what is happening already now. So we know what happens with the current law on the Greek islands. We know what happened in Hungary in the transit zones. So we should not be naive and just take what is written on the paper and say, oh, this is exactly how things will go down. So technically, of course, if you apply for asylum, there would be an individual procedure. But I think there a number of things one has to consider. So first of all, especially with the mandatory cases, those are all kind of groups that would be a bit under suspicion of like, those are not refugees to start with. So I think one can expect that there would be a certain presumption in the whole procedure. Oh, this is just about denying the right to protection. And as I mentioned, especially from countries also with low recognition rates, we hear from people who do legal counseling, etc., that these can be countries where you can have quite complex cases. For example, gender persecution grounds, human trafficking, perhaps religious minorities. So especially these kind of cases really need a safe surrounding to be able to be processed. They need guarantees, especially vulnerable people need guarantees. They need adequate support. They need a safe zone, you could say. And I think all of these things we can say quite confidently that this would not be the case in an asylum border procedure, because there are requirements of how fast the procedure has to go. So there's a certain pressure also on the authorities to process everything pretty quickly. Like I said, what we see, for example, I'm sorry, I always refer to Greece, but this is quite an illustrating example. And we also have a partner organization there, Refugee Support Aegean. So I just hear a lot also about that situation. But if you have, let's say 800 people on an island or in a camp, and then you have 2 lawyers working, there, or 3, it's just a bit illustrating. Of course, in areas, in border areas, like away from bigger towns, you often don't have that big of an infrastructure, let's say. You don't have that many lawyers, you don't have that many people who can work there. Of course, in Greece, for example, over the time, quite an infrastructure built up of like NGOs who help, etc. But it's still not enough. Like the lawyers we work with, like there are just too many cases. You can't do them all because then you don't do them properly. So it is really a problem also just of capacity on a side, especially when it comes to lawyers, that you can't just pump up. Like either you have enough lawyers or you don't. And in most of these situations, you just don't. And then there's the question of access. Like, can lawyers usually, I think as long as the EU country still somewhat respects the rule of law, when looking to some member states, that is a bit doubtful at the moment. But if they do, then of course lawyers would have access once they are mandated. But what if they're not? What if they don't know the clients yet, but the people also don't know how to reach the lawyers? But if the lawyers can't go to the camp and do like a counseling session or anything, then this connection would just not start. And the people are stuck there, don't know who to call, don't know who to ask. So these are really the critical points that would need to be addressed. And one thing I think, which is also quite crucial, which I did not mention, is that for the screening, it's not clear what authority would actually do the screening, or it's left to the member state. And in Germany, we have the airport procedure, which is also a border procedure. And for example, there, the first interview is always done by the federal police. And I think this is quite likely that in a lot of cases, the screening might actually be conducted by police authorities who usually don't have the training to work with asylum seekers or with people who have like special vulnerabilities. So also during like a 5-day screening, there is no way you can detect vulnerabilities which are not obvious. Of course, if someone is like really, really young, or if a person is in a wheelchair, you will see that there's a vulnerability. But especially when it comes to like heavy trauma, or also, you know, a teenager like might be then assumed to be already over 18, but actually he or she is not. Like, all of these things are really hard to assess in such a short time by perhaps not that well trained people who actually usually have other tasks which are not concerned with protection seekers. So all of this is just in general then creates quite a problematic setup. And of course, especially when we look to Hungary, the transit zones are a horrible example. I don't think that Hungary, or like that all member states would go as bad as Hungary, but it's still just a situation we had. So I think when we change the law, we have to make sure that this is never happening again. But this is not what the proposal does. The proposal actually foresees a similar situation, or even, you know, to a certain extent allows the member states to do more with regard to these border procedures and transit zones, etc. So I think it just completely continues that path of Moria, of the transit zones. And what we really need is a change of this path.
Milica, could you maybe tell us now a little bit more about the humanitarian situation in Serbia? Like, is Serbia able to conduct, for example, asylum procedure, also to give legal advice for people seeking asylum? And how is also the situation for people on the move in Serbia at the moment, especially also for minors or for special vulnerability groups?
The situation is definitely not good. There is around probably 15,000 people in Serbia at every moment, and the numbers are definitely on the rise. We have what is called asylum centers, and we have only 5 of them. In Serbia, these centers should accommodate the asylum seekers, but that's not the case. People inside the asylum centers also don't have any kind of documents. They're not being registered. They don't get the proper information. And then we have 13 transit camps, which should serve as an accommodation for people who are not in the system. Although this is not covered by the law, this has established like a practice. These transit camps were made in 2016 after the Balkanroute was closed. A lot of people got stuck in Serbia, so some temporary facilities were arranged to be accommodation centers. And also these transit centers served as a temporary accommodation for people who were waiting to enter Hungary and start their asylum procedure in these transit centers at the borders. People who are within the transit camps, they have only some very, very basic needs satisfied. So it's not even 3 meals a day very often. It's much less. The conditions inside the camps are not good. Very often these camps are basically just the tents, so without the proper bathrooms, without the toilets, without any privacy. So it can be up to 60, 70 people sleeping in one big tent. Also, a lot of people are not accommodated in the camps. They live in squats in the border area or one of the squats here in Belgrade. People don't have access to asylum. They, first of all, are not getting proper information. They don't know how the system works. They don't know what are their obligations. This is mainly because of the police and commissariat authorities. Commissariat is a public institution in charge of running all the camps. So people are not referred and they don't get the proper information on how to start the procedure, what are their obligations, where they have to go first, what they have to do later on. So majority of people are never being registered. For example, in 2019, only 12,000 people were registered as asylum seekers, but only a bit more than 200 actually managed to apply for asylum. And this is because they're not getting a proper information what to do. Now we have, there is definitely a lack of healthcare. There is definitely a lack of social protections. We don't have any kind of screening procedure, any kind of protection procedures. There is a lot of unaccompanied minors. We are seeing children at the age of 8, 9, 10 who are alone, we had a couple of cases of children. We had 2 boys who were age of 12 in 2 separate occasions. They were in a squat with a broken leg, and we barely forced the local center for social welfare to go to the field and to accommodate them. So there is definitely not any kind of protection here. Also, now the Serbian police is being very aggressive towards the refugees. So we are getting reports on the violence by the Serbian police, especially in this border area. They're not being treated. So we had Doctors Without Borders. They had their clinic here, and for a long time, they were the only healthcare providers. Since they closed their mission and left, majority of refugees now are not getting any kind of health protection while they're here in Serbia. And in addition to all of that, we also now in the last few months, we have a rise of these far-right groups, which are organizing themselves within national patrols. So they are basically patrolling the streets of Belgrade and other cities in the border area, where they're harassing refugees, forcing them to go, even beating them. And these groups are being tolerated by the government. So definitely the situation now is getting worse. But also I just wanted to add something based on these access to transit camps. And I want just to say that, for example, when we had these transit camps in Hungary, so the transit camps themselves were run by the Hungarian government, and they did all of these monitoring and procedure and everything. But then Serbian authorities, let's say, provided people, but brought people to these transit camps. And there was a lot of misusage of power by the Serbian authorities. So we had some people who waited, for example, just 2 weeks in Serbian transit camps before they were transported to Hungarian transit camps. But on the other side, you had people who waited 3 years to be transferred to the Hungarian transit camps. We also had some, it was very clear that the Serbian authorities were misusing their power, and that possibly they were taking bribe or who knows what was happening. So it doesn't only depend on the EU authorities who will run these transit camps, but it also depends on the Serbian authorities and who will actually have access within Serbia to enter and start this EU asylum procedure at the border area. So we feel that Serbia here will also have a very big influence, that we will declare a lot of people as being illegally here and who should start deportation procedure. But then also those that don't get these deportation orders, it's very questionable if they will actually manage to reach the Serbian north borders to start this EU asylum procedure.
And could you maybe explain a bit deeper how it is for people to access asylum in Serbia directly? How are the numbers?
Mm-hmm. Currently, according to the statistics of the Commissariat for Refugees and Migrations, they are a public institution who runs the camps. They say that in 1 month, so from the first until the last day of a month, there is around between 10 and 11,000 people being accommodated within the camps. Our experience from the field shows that there is at least 60% of that numbers of people who have never been accommodated in the camps. So who are staying in illegal squats or who are being accommodated in hostels and private apartments run by smugglers in bigger cities. Out of that number, there is around not even 100 people who actually apply for asylum in 1 month. So there is a very big disproportion of people being able to apply for asylum now. The first step in asylum procedure here in Serbia is going to the police station within the administration for foreigners. So that's basically only one police station in each city where they can be registered and then referred to the proper camp. When people go to the police station, very often the police refuses to register them, or they do register them, but then they always refer them to the furthest camp. So if the people come to Belgrade to be registered, they will most certainly be referred to one of the camps at the Macedonian or Bulgarian border. Then they try to go to one of the closer camps, for example, to one of the 2 camps that we have in Belgrade, and they are being accepted by the commissariat in this camp. However, very often after 3 or 4 days, they're being expelled from the camp into the street. And at this point, their registration paper has expired. So they cannot go to the previously referred camp, and they're losing the status of asylum seeker. According to our law, which is new, this is a novelty from 2 years ago when we have the new law on asylum, people can be registered only once. So if you lose this possibility and nobody tells you that you have to go to this first camp, you go to the second camp, and then the public authorities, the people who wear Serbian uniforms, tells you that you can stay here, and you think that you're doing everything according to the rules. And then 4 days later, you're being kicked out on the street, and then you're not being accepted in any other camp. And you cannot restart procedures. You cannot go to do registration again and to be referred to a different camp. So basically, you're using your legal residency. You're considered as illegal migrant, as somebody who is not actually in need of international protection, but somebody who wants to misuse the asylum system. And we have a lot of these cases, so where people are not going to the proper camp because they're not getting proper information, and then they're being stuck outside of system for good. So this is definitely the biggest problem. We don't have any, according to the law, people are entitled to free legal help, but the legal help is very, very limited. Majority of legal aid providers, they are working only with people who already start the asylum procedures. So for those who manage to get to the proper camp to actually apply for asylum, so they are the ones that are getting some legal help. But people, the newcomers, people that only arrive in Serbia, they're not getting any information. There are, for example, no publicly available information. There are no posters in the camp or in the police stations. The police officers and the commissariat, they don't have interpreters. So also the communication with public authorities is very limited. So this is also one of the biggest problems people here are facing.
Thank you for the information. And there's a question from the chat if organizations like the UNHCR or IOM are working in the camps, and how's the situation for other solidarity groups supporting people on the move?
That's a question for me, right? IOM and the UNHCR are present. IOM is more present than the UNHCR. IOM has their offices in majority of camps across Serbia, but their mandate is only to promote the voluntary return to the countries of origin. So they're not providing any other type of assistance. According to some information that we got, we know that IOM also helped build these new detention centers in Serbia at the Bulgarian and Romanian border. UNHCR, they have an office here in Serbia, but they're not present in the camps. They work with some NGOs here in Serbia who are their implementing partners, but they're not present in all the camps. They're present in just these 5 asylum centers, so 13 camps are not covered. And again, they also, here UNHCR has a policy that they divide people to real asylum seekers and non-real asylum seekers, where the real ones are the ones that actually want to stay here in Serbia and that come from only a certain list of countries where there is actually war. So for example, they don't consider people from Afghanistan as a real asylum seekers because, well, there is no war in Afghanistan and life there is good. So they're not really present, and they're not really providing any tangible assistance and help. When it comes to other solidarity groups, now the Serbian authorities and the Serbian government has changed their policies, and now we have a couple of cases of criminalization of solidarity. We had a case of the No-Name Kitchen that probably you're aware of. They went publicly with this a few weeks ago, where their volunteers, they only have foreign volunteers who got a cancellation of stay and who are being harassed by the police. This is also happening to other groups, usually informal groups, who are trying to help refugees. In the last few weeks, the Serbian police is evicting all of these squats. They're stopping people who are working for NGOs on the streets, taking their documents, giving friendly advice not to be there, not to help refugees anymore. This also happened to us on several occasions, both here in Belgrade and in the border area. So there is now definitely a much higher pressure also from the police and authorities to stop people from helping refugees here.
There was also the questions, because you named it earlier, that MSF, like Doctors Without Borders, apparently stopped their mission in Serbia, and there was a question in the chat why they stopped it and also when they stopped their mission. You know something about it?
Yeah, the mission was stopped in March this year. They had a clinic here in Belgrade, and they also worked in, they had like a mobile team that worked in the border area or in other places where it was necessary. I know that they are planning to return to some extent. I'm still not sure on the exact dates and in what capacities. I know that they will not have the clinic again here in Belgrade. They will probably have just some mobile team. The mission itself of MSF was revoked a bit earlier, and then they joined the team from Serbia to the mission in Greece. So it's not up to me to give the exact reasons, but I think they pulled all the resources to Greece because of the situation on Lesbos and Greek islands there.
All right, thank you. Then there was a question maybe to both of you. What can you do to work against the pact of migration, and like in a legal and also in an activist way? And if there could be a change in the National European Court. So maybe Judith, Wiebke, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can start on that. So perhaps for people who are really concerned basically about what might happen in the future and who hear about the new pact and really don't want this to happen, Pro Asyl, we actually did launch a petition towards the European Parliament because we do believe that the European Parliament is now the main actor which can still either stop it or make significant changes. We don't believe that much in the council where the member states who debate, but we do think that the parliament might still be like, or is going to play a very influential role. So of course, we're very happy for more people who sign it. Perhaps one of you, Magda or Pauline, could also post the petition in the chat. That would be great. And of course, I think, especially once or if it's adopted, because that's also still a big if, like 2016, we talked these proposals up and down, and then they just never came. So I don't think it is a given that we'll actually see the new pact be made a reality. I mean, we now have these huge discussions concerning rule of law and the budget, etc. So we do already see again how things are blocked. Actually, in our opinion, we rather have it blocked than come in the form that it is right now. So it is quite a interesting question still if it's actually going to come. But if it's going to come, for sure we will see litigation. I think this is a given on many different parts. But of course, it is also then a bit open, as always, as to what the outcome will be. I think it's a bit of a difference in some ways between the European Court of Human Rights and the Code of Justice of the European Union, because the Code of Justice of the European Union also places a lot of their jurisprudence primarily on the secondary law. And then when the secondary law changes, a lot has to be litigated again, or like be clarified again, also just when it comes to the implementation. But also sadly with the European Court of Human Rights, we saw in the last year, also especially with regard to Hungary and Serbia, a bit of a backtracking in general on migration jurisprudence. So let's see. I mean, of course, I think this will be important to litigate, but that's also still a bit in the future at the moment.
Do you also want to add something, Milica? If not, we will go to the next question, as you like.
Yeah, no, nothing. I mean, I completely agree. Definitely, I'm sure that all legal aid providers will do the litigation cases, but definitely also these cases will take some time before you find the proper cases, the proofs, before you get the verdict. So definitely, it's something that will take some time.
Yes, thank you. So we will move on to the next question from the chat. The question was more for Wiebke. It referred to the European Convention of Human Rights and the Article 13. And yeah, the question was, there was this case in 2012 in France where a Brazilian national living in French Guinea was expelled without the possibility of an effective remedy. And so how does the new border procedure relate to the Article 13? Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so Article 13 is the right to an effective remedy. And of course, it's one of the important or crucial aspects of the border procedure. And I mean, in general, there is quite a substantive jurisprudence on different aspects when it comes to the screening and the border procedure, on the question if it's like legally speaking detention or not, on what has to be examined under what conditions. And that case is particularly illustrative on, I mean, in that case, if I remember correctly, it's basically because the person was detained and had a very short period only, it was considered that the person was not able to prepare their asylum application enough. And so it is a very important case for sure to bring into play when it comes to saying, hey, we don't think that these procedures will be fair. But in my experience, unfortunately, when you talk to policymakers, it's not that you pull out a case like this and then they're like, oh yeah, no, we can't do this. But they're like, oh no, but it's different. See, you have a bit more time. See, we will allow NGOs to come. But if that's the given, actually on the ground, that's a whole other story. So unfortunately, we often have to also, in the end, litigate these cases again and again because certain circumstances change a bit. So there you had a detention and like very few days. Okay, what if it's like 1 week? What if it's 2 weeks? So this can be a bit frustrating because you're like, well, but we have the decision and it's good, and you know we should just make sure that nothing like this happens again. But yeah, so of course it's important to really look at what decisions we already have and how can we use them, and how can we also use them to make our arguments, and then again use them as legal precedents to argue in the future why certain situations are not in conforming with the European Convention on Human Rights, for example. Yeah.
Thank you.
We've been wondering also as Balkanbrücke, what we as also European citizens can demand from our governments. So we would like to ask you, Milica, what do you think from a Serbian perspective, what needs to change at the external borders and what kind of we need to demand from our governments maybe first?
Oh, a difficult question. Well, definitely from the EU side, it should definitely be demanded that legislations are being respected, that all the procedural guarantees are being respected, that people really do have effective access to asylum, and that their asylum application will be examined in a proper way. When it comes to Serbia, I definitely think simply because this Serbian EU accession procedure is being so closely monitored by the EU, I definitely think that the pressures from the EU could affect a better situation here in Serbia for the refugees, that the pressures could influence on the Serbia to improve its protection system, to improve its asylum procedure, and to actually force Serbia to establish an effective asylum procedure where people will have proper protection and where their asylum claims would be assessed in a proper way.
So thank you very much. I think there are no more. Yes, there's one more question in the chat. The question was if there are any, if you could give evidences or for that the transit zones, the Hungarian transit zones were on Serbian soil. Or yes, explain that maybe a bit further.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I can send you the agreement, and then maybe we can put it later on in the comments or in the description of the video. There is agreement between Serbia and Hungary on the position of checkpoints and the official border crossing points. And according to this agreement, the Hungarian checkpoints are on the Serbian territory. And then basically they build the fence which follows. If you come to the official border crossing point, you will see the checkpoint, the little houses where they check for your passport and ID cards. And then from there you have the fence going both ways. I can send it. I know it is available in Serbian, but I'm guessing it's also available in English, so we can post it later on in the video.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Then I think, yeah, we will just post the link of the petition and of the article to the event, and everyone who is interested can check there. So yeah, I think we will come to an end, and we would like maybe you two to just give us a final word. What do you wish, expect, maybe hope that how we can shape the asylum policy in the future, or yes.
Sorry. What do I expect and hope for? Well, we definitely hope for the more effective system. We hope that people's rights will be respected. They will actually have will be able to access asylum procedure here in Serbia, but also in European Union. We hope that the number of pushbacks and the number of deaths due to these pushbacks will significantly decrease, that we will not have any such cases in the future. However, what I personally really expect to happen is not so bright. We expect that situation will get probably even worse than it is now. But we are hoping that solidarity groups on the ground will continue with their great work. And we also hope that local community will get more involved with this question, and that they will also show solidarity with people on the move, not just in Serbia, but across Europe.
Yeah, perhaps the first expectation, I do think that we will continue to have this debate for still really quite a long time. I don't think that the new pact and the reform process is something that's going to happen overnight. The German presidency of the council did want to kind of have first political agreements by the end of this year, and that seems to be clearly not happening, for example. So I think it's going to still be a longer process. And I think it's really important to have also debates on like different aspects, like today, you know, to look at like what would it actually mean for a country like Serbia and for their process and for these border situations. And I think it can be really informative for everyone, but also helpful to look into different aspects to how the effects would be to really inform also our advocacy work and our campaigning. And I mean, my hope would be that, of course, the just like underlying aspect of the whole system would change towards protection at the focus, towards human rights at the focus, and not be about deterrence and deportation, basically, as its focus, as it is right now. But yes, I'm also not quite hopeful at the moment, considering the queue in politics. But I do think that, as Milika mentioned, like solidarity from the ground, support system on the ground, I think are just really crucial at the moment. And I hope that in the longer run will also like shape and change also politics on top, so that we can then also have actually good law changes again coming from Brussels and not negative law changes.
Yes, thank you both so much for your inputs, and it was really interesting. Not necessarily bright, but very interesting. And yes, in the chat there was just very beautifully written "Shut down Fortress Europe." Very nice. Yes, thank you so much for your input, your time, and also your work. Hopefully we can change the asylum policy in a more solidary and more human rights-based way. And yes, thank you to everyone who attended. Also a special thanks to Chrissy and Marcus, who we didn't see in this webinar, but who did a great background work. So thank you very much to you both. And yes, have a great evening. Goodbye, see you next time. Thank you.